you very much, Ellie, and welcome everybody. It's really good to be talking to you this morning. This is a revision support session for the first exam series of the new modular route for International GCSE Physics with Edexcel. My name is Tim Lawrence. I'm the subject advisor at Edexcel for international science qualifications. And I'll just explain a little bit about my role. A few of you might know me already. You can contact me by email or book a Teams call with me as an Edexcel teacher to discuss any questions you have about the delivery of the course. I really advise mainly on the specification, the exam papers, the other 3 resources that are available on our qualification website, which we'll look at in today's session. I'm not an examiner. I'm not part of the assessment team, which produces future exam papers. And that's quite important because in the UK, we have government regulations, which means that anyone who works for the exam board who has seen future exam papers isn't allowed to talk directly to teachers in the way that I'm talking to you today. And that's to ensure that in the interest of fairness, the future exam papers are completely secure and trainers don't accidentally give anything away. It does mean that some of you may have questions today that I can't answer, and I need to go back to colleagues who are involved in the process of producing the papers, and I'll be making notes of hard questions like that as they come up. And in my next science update for international teachers, I will put an FAQs section in there with answers to any of those questions. So as Ellie said just now, please do use the chat to ask questions as soon as they occur to you. I'll be pausing at several points during my presentation to read your questions and respond to them. And at the end, we should have a decent amount of time for you to ask more questions and share ideas for supporting students with their revision once you've heard all that I have prepared to say to you. So let me look at the aims and objectives for our session on this next slide. You should be able to find these slides in the delegate booklet, in the delegate pack. There is a delegate booklet as well, which has these aims and objectives in it, some useful links, and a small number of student responses to past linear exam questions, which we'll look at later on. And you should be able to download that from the resources section in the Zoom meeting, along with the specimen assessment materials, the example papers that are published on the website, and the specification, which you might want to refer to during this training. So we're going to review key features of the modular specification and the structure of the assessments. I've taken the slides for this first section from some training that I delivered back last summer. I think it was in June 2024. So some of you will have already seen those slides. I think it's useful when you're preparing students for the first round of exams just to refresh some of those key features. And it might also help if you have questions from parents and from students as the exams draw nearer, just to clarify and refresh some of that information about how this modular course is designed. Then we'll look at the assessment objectives and command words and mathematical skills. Now, these are the same as for the linear GCSE, which many of you will be very familiar with. There are no changes to the subject content or the skills that are being assessed in these modular exams. However, I think it's a good time to look at those and just for us to think together about how, for a student on the modular journey who's taking an exam perhaps a year earlier than they would have done otherwise, there's a few things that you might want to focus on in your preparation. By the way, if you've attended the biology version of this training earlier this morning, then a lot of this will be the same. So it's a similar presentation to one I've already delivered today, but there will be some physics specific information coming up a bit later. We'll have a look at some free resources that are available and past training content that you may wish to access on our website. And then there's a bit of exam feedback. Now, if you've attended the exam insights training for the linear international GCSE exams, then this should be familiar to you. But I think it's a good thing to just revisit, even if you have heard it before, and just consider how can this inform your revision support with your students going into this first modular exam. Because the style of exam questions is going to be the same, they're going to be using the same command words, the same style of mark schemes. And so it's very much a case of what can we learn from the linear exams, given that we don't have a past exam series for modular to refer back to. Okay, I'm just having a quick look at the chat. Please do use the chat both for questions about these aims and objectives, about the content of the talk today, but also if you have any technical issues, if you're not able to download the delegate pack, then Ellie will be able to help you with that, and I will do my best to keep an eye on the chat as we go as well. Oh, and I should have said, we'll finish with an opportunity, as I said, for you to ask any questions that remain, but also it would be great to hear from you what you're planning to focus on in your final lessons and any tips and advice you have. We've got 40 people on the call now, so a wealth of experience at delivering international GCSEs from around the world. So the modular route, let's just recap some key features of this new specification. So the key difference is that we have assessments organized by unit. So we refer to paper 1 and paper 2 for the linear route, which must be taken together at the end of the course. Whereas the language now for the modular is that we have 2 units and they can be taken over multiple exam series. So the exams can be spread in various different models, which we'll just briefly recap. There's no tier for either. No, you may not be familiar with this concept, but for UK GCSEs in science, we have higher tier and foundation tier, and foundation tier are limited to grade 5 as the top grade, whereas higher goes all the way up to grade 9. But we don't have that for international there. It's a single exam paper with access to all the grades. Grades are calculated on a uniform mark scale. Now, if you teach international A-level physics, then you'll be familiar with this probably. It's a numerical scale which has set grade boundaries. They're always the same, and a conversion formula which is unique to each exam paper, which is basically decided by the senior examiners when they set the grade boundaries for that particular paper, converts the raw mark on the paper into a uniform mark. And it's the uniform mark which then goes forward to calculate the final grade. The reason for this is that it means that if there's different unit 1s being considered in different exam series with slight differences in the difficulty of the paper, then the uniform mark scale will even that out and ensure that they contribute the same towards the final grade. But that does require some explanation, and it confuses parents and students and teachers. So if you would like more information on that, then I can share some links with you. Students can resit individual units in any exam series. We had a lot of questions about resits from the GCSE biology teachers who joined us earlier today. There's no limit to the number of resits, but there are only 2 exam series per year. That's one more than for linear, but we have the summer exam series, which is the first one this year for the new modular route. And then from then on, every October, November, as well as every May, June. But there's no time limit. So it's designed to be a 2-year course. like all GCSEs and international GCSEs, but it could be taken over 3 years. Students can resit, having finished the course the following year, if they want to improve their grade. And yes, there's no limit to the number of times they can take a particular unit. However, the best unit mark from the past 2 attempts will be the one that counts. And what this means is that if a student takes a unit for the second time and does worse, then they need to think very carefully about taking it for a third time, because if they do worse again and get their lowest mark on the third attempt, then they would lose that first mark because it wouldn't be one of their most recent 2 attempts. So the best mark from the past 2 attempts counts when a final grade is cashed in. And the cash in is something which the exams officer will enter along with the final unit usually, and the cash in entry means that we generate a certificate and a final grade, which wasn't an issue for the linear course because they had to take both exams together at the end. But now your exams officer can decide when to cash in, add up all the unit marks and obtain a grade. So an example of the modular journey, starting teaching last September. I imagine most of you did. Entry deadline is 21st of March, coming up very soon for the summer series, the May-June series. Typically, students would just be taking Unit 1 at the end of their first year of study, with a results day in August. It's the 21st of August. Continue in September, teaching the second half of the course. Now, in November, they could enter Unit 2, or they could resit Unit 1. Various options. More typically, they would take Unit 2 in the May-June series of 2026, with a final result in August 2026. So that's a typical journey. Benefits may be worth recapping in case you're having conversations with parents who are interested in the reasons for the change. Well, there's some significant benefits to students in terms of the amount of stress they're under because they're not having to take all of their exams in one go at the end of their period of study. They can spread the revision burden and the stress over 2 years. They have more opportunities to demonstrate their skills. They can improve based on feedback on earlier units, and they can sit exams whenever they're ready, when you decide is the right time for them. You have the benefit as teachers of feedback from that first set of exam results. You've seen how they perform in an actual exam rather than a mock exam, and it can reduce the pressure on exams officers and particularly parents if they're having to pay for exam entries as well. So just a quick reminder here of the breakdown of the different courses and resources available. Some of you will be teaching double award physics, and that means that the physics units are 5 and 6 because double award students, they take 6 units for the modular, which is a change from the linear. For the linear double award, some of you will know those students just have 3 exams. They just sit the paper 1s for biology, chemistry and physics. But now they have 6 exams, but shorter. And the 5 and 6 are the physics units. We'll be talking about some of these supporting resources later on in this session. So we're almost there with this first section, and then I'll pause to allow time for questions in the chat. So 3 different examples here of how a student might progress through the course. Example 1 is perhaps the most straightforward, but many students would benefit, no doubt, from a resit opportunity in November. This is year 10 and year 11, by the way, which are the the grades or year numberings in the UK for GCSE. That would be equivalent to grade 9 and grade 10 if you're using the American system. And I'll leave this slide on screen for a couple of minutes now for you to digest. So, big change, the significant change from linear to modular is that you now have this splitting of units between the papers. For the linear system, then all of the topics are assessed in both papers, but paper 1 does not assess the physics only content, which has a P in the specification reference number. But now that physics only content with the P can appear or will appear in both papers. So you need to make sure that you've delivered all of that for Unit 1. And you need to be absolutely sure that all of the content that you see on the left of the screen here is covered in time for Unit 1. Those topic headings in bold here with the asterisk are physics only topics, but within the other topics there will be some physics only content. Notice also that units comes up in both of these, so knowledge of units can be assessed across both of the exams. And I'll just pause there, see if anybody has a question they'd like to ask in the chat. Okay, thank you. 2 questions already. Chema, thank you. Yes, Unit 2 is available, and it is possible to enter your students who finished the course, who would have started on the linear route 2 years ago. It is possible to enter them for Unit 1 and Unit 2 modular exams because the content is the same. It's not how the course has really been designed for certification this year, but the message I've had when I've previously been asked this question and I've gone to my colleagues in assessment is that there's no barrier to you doing that if you want to, with the advantage that then those students would have a resit opportunity in November for 1 unit, which they wouldn't have if they took linear. Do students have to memorize equations for the modular course? Very good question. And we have the follow-up question, is there a formula sheet? So the short answer is no, they don't have to memorize the equations, because yes, they will be issued with a full formula sheet. I think it may still be coming soon to the qualification web page, but it's the same equation sheet or formula sheet as the linear exam candidates will have. So when it appears, it will be on the teaching and learning materials page, which we'll be talking about shortly, and it will appear under summer 2025 support. But for now, you can use the equation sheet that's on the linear qualification web page for students to practice using that in any mock exams or practice assessments that you do. And that's confirmed for all the exams this year, so both series next year and in 2027 for both linear and modular. Norjan, thank you. What does it mean by separate physics content only? So you may only be teaching International GCSE Physics, so you don't need to really worry about this. But there's another option called double award science, which involves teaching 2/3 of the physics content, 2/3 of the chemistry, 2/3 of the biology, and then students receive a double GCSE. So they study all 3 subjects, but for 2 GCSEs. And that course has less content in it, so it does not contain the separate physics content only. I hope that's clear. Suzanne, thank you. Will we get more specimen papers? More specimen papers are being written, but they will not be ready until after this exam series, I believe. So I think they're expected to be ready in August. So there'll be a second set then. So students who have been taught linear double science, double award, are they able to sit the modular exams in May 2025? That is the message that I have been given, yes, that you could enter students for all of the modular exams, units 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 for double, or you could enter them for linear modular and cash in. Yes, there's no barrier to doing that. Yes, Abdel Fattah, thank you. So in the specification, it states that the majority of equations are not provided, which is confusing. Now, that's because the specification has technically not changed. However, the full equation sheet is additional exam support, which has been confirmed. So effectively, the specification is no longer accurate on that point, but only for these next 3 years. Now, the reason for this is complicated, but it's because this course is modeled on the UK GCSE, and the UK GCSE is under the control of the UK government. The UK government and its regulator of qualifications, which is called Ofqual, they decided as a temporary support measure for students affected by COVID-19 school closures to introduce the full equation sheet. And then that has been extended 3 times now, up to 2027. And Pearson Edexcel's policy is to provide the same support for international GCSE students. So we've done that. Therefore, they'll have the full equation sheet for the next 3 years, but the specification has technically not been changed, so it still has that comment in it that they need to learn all the equations, but they don't for the next 3 years. I hope that's clear. Okay, question, interesting one about switching exam board. If a student takes unit 1 in the first year and then the second year he or she changes to CAIE or AQA, will they receive U or nothing as the Edexcel IG physics final grading? Yes, if they don't sit both units, then they can't receive any certification. They won't have a qualification. If they switched exam boards, they would have to take all of the assessments for the new exam board. So there's no half GCSE certificate for unit 1, and you can't transfer that credit to the other exam boards. The sample assessment material does not have the full equation sheet. Thanks, Paul, for pointing that out. It's not an error because the full equation sheet is not actually part of the exam paper. And when the sample assessment sheet was written, the decision hadn't been taken by the UK government in any case. So it's always, for maths, actually, it's part of the exam paper, but for physics, it's always been a separate sheet, which will be available on the website. So it won't actually be sent to you, but we'll put it in our science subject updates once it's been published on the website. For now, in fact, let me just put this in the chat for you. I'll just find the link to the linear equation sheet The modular one will be identical. It's just it will say modular on it. Bear with me a second. Okay, that link I've just put in the chat. Same formula sheet for both linear and modular, correct? Okay, thank you for the excellent questions. I'll move on to the next section of my presentation, but please do keep the questions coming. Assessment objectives and command words. These are no different. Again, same as for linear. So many of you will be very familiar with these, but my suggestion is that perhaps even more important for students who are taking an exam a year early, it can be useful to make sure that they are clear on how they're being assessed. So the first assessment objective is really the most obvious one, and the one that as teachers we tend to focus on, we need to focus on, the knowledge and understanding of physics. So often the questions are about recall, to just test whether they have that knowledge. That makes up approximately 40% of the marks on the modular exams as it does the linear. Assessment objective 2 is the application of knowledge and understanding. And this is another 40%. So I think it's really significant to bear in mind that as important as recall of the physics they've been taught is students' ability to apply it to perhaps a novel situation and to kind of think in the exam about how they can sort of take their knowledge and use it to solve a problem. So that's a really important skill to practice, and I think past paper questions are by far the most useful way of doing that. Of course, we don't have any past papers, just that one sample assessment for modular. However, the style of questions assessing these same assessment objectives are no different from modular to linear, so we can use linear questions, and more on how to locate those coming up in a few minutes. Assessment objective 3 is probably the most challenging one, the final approximately 20% of the mark for interpreting, evaluating, making judgments, drawing conclusions, and this applies to experimental procedures and skills as well as to the theory. Command words are the same as for linear, but again, students are a little younger, perhaps taking this first modular exam have had a bit less opportunity to practice past paper questions. So really good to focus them on these words. 4 of them are in bold here. It's quite a subtle bold effect. Comment on, discuss, evaluate, justify. Up to you whether you want to share in the chat or not, but I just invite you to consider for a minute why those 4 might be in bold in my slide. You can find definitions of these command words in Appendix 4 of the specification. If you weren't here at the start of the meeting, then you have that specification in the delegate pack, which you can download from the resources menu in Zoom. So I'll just pause for a minute or two to let you look at that, think about those 4 command words, and feel free to suggest why they're in bold in the chat if you would like to. also an opportunity for you to ask any more questions that you have. Okay, so these four are in bold, excuse me, because their command words are particularly used to assess AO3. I'll just go back to that previous slide. So this skill of evaluation, analysis, drawing conclusions, interpreting, a particularly good one to draw students' attention to and explain that when they see those command words, they need to answer in a different way, drawing conclusions and interpreting the information that they've been given. Mathematical skills are a key part of the course. There's quite a long list in the specification. It's another one of the appendices at the end, so you might want to find that in a moment. I'll just quickly read them to you because this might be a bit small on your screen. So the first section is called Arithmetic and Numerical Computation. They're slightly different for each of the three sciences, and as you might expect, there's perhaps slightly more for physics than for the others. Recognize and use numbers in decimal form and in standard form, use of ratios, fractions, percentages, powers, and roots, making estimates of the results of simple calculations without using a calculator, and using calculators to handle sine x and inverse sine of x, where x is expressed in degrees. Now, this point about making estimates understandably provoked some questions from biology teachers about whether a calculator is allowed in the exams. Yes, it is allowed in both the modular units as in the linear. In fact, it's very important, I think, that candidates have a calculator that they're confident to use. However, the making estimates, which is something if they study GCSE, International GCSE maths, they will be familiar with, is a skill that the calculator won't necessarily help them with, because it's the skill of effectively rounding large numbers to one or two significant figures, simplifying a calculation and giving them an estimate that, for example, they could use to check that their exact calculation using the calculator is accurate. So with all of these skills, the expectation isn't necessarily that you have taught them this. This is all GCSE mathematics content, but because they're taking this exam perhaps a year early, it's worthwhile, I think, as part of their preparation for it, that you ensure that they are confident with all of these skills. It might be that you want to discuss with your mathematics teacher colleagues in your school and just ask them if they've actually covered all of these topics in their lessons by the time your students will take their Unit 1 physics. Handling data is another whole section. So significant figures, means, bar charts, frequency tables, diagrams and histograms, probability, mode and median, scatter diagrams, order of magnitude. Graphs, y equals mx plus c for linear relationships. Translating between graphical and numerical forms, so plotting graphs, reading values from graphs, common exam questions. Plotting, determining the slope and intercept of a linear graph, understand, draw and use the slope of a tangent to a curve to measure rate of change. That's something which students have found challenging in past linear physics exams. and understanding the physical significance of area between a curve and the x-axis, and measure it by counting squares as appropriate to find an estimate of the area under a curve. Yes, interesting question from Cornell about a recommended calculator. There's no difference between linear and modular in this respect. We don't, as an exam board, recommend a particular model. Nowadays, there are many calculators with advanced functions which can store equations, for example, and data and other things. So the only guidance we do have is to direct schools to the UK guidance on calculators. I can just share that link for you, actually. So the organization in the UK that oversees all exams is called the JCQ. And so all the exam boards follow its regulations. And for Edexcel international exams, we effectively expect international centres to follow the same guidance. So they don't publish lists of allowed and not allowed calculators, because new models are being produced so often it would immediately go out of date. But there is some fairly clear guidance in there, and if they have like complicated graphical calculators that can store information, they have to put them into an exam mode, which these calculators tend to have now, which disables certain features. And it's also important, obviously, they can't access the internet on their calculator, which some devices allow them to. But really, apart from that, they don't need anything complicated, as long as it's a scientific calculator with the trigonomic functions, because they need to be able to use that sign button, then they refine. Okay, just to finish off this, maths, algebra and geometry. So those symbols, changing the subject of an equation, substituting values into equations, solving them, angular measures in degrees, visualizing and representing 2D and 3D objects, and calculating areas, surface areas and volumes. So quite a lot of mathematical skills, around 10% of the marks available, and therefore quite significant, and they need to be sure that they can do all of those things ready for Unit 1, because any of them could come up. Okay, I'll do the next section fairly quickly and then pause again in case anyone would like to ask questions in the chat. The qualification webpage looks like this. If you find it, and the link the link to this page, by the way, is in your delegate booklet. You'll find a little picture of me there, the teachingscience@pearson.com email address, which comes through to me, the phone line, which goes to our customer services team, but they will pass things that they can't answer on to me. The link to sign up for the updates that I've mentioned a couple of times. And there's also a link on that page, which isn't quite showing on this screenshot, to book a Teams call with me. And please do take advantage of that. But the screenshot really is here to point out where the teaching and learning materials link is, in case you've not found that. And that brings up a number of drop-down menus, one of which is maths and practical support. So we've just been looking at those math skills. These are worksheets which were uploaded in December, and they're resources you can use in the classroom. They're free to you, and so I recommend having a look at those and perhaps considering using them as part of your revision of those math skills as we get closer to the exam. Exam Wizard is our free tool for searching past papers and building practice papers and assessments. Now, because there are no past papers for modular, it's actually searching linear past paper questions. But as you can see from this screenshot, there is a a modular 9-to-1 International GCSE option now for choosing the qualification. And that means that you can search using the topic structure of the modular course, which makes producing like practice sets of questions or practice exam papers for this Unit 1 exam much more convenient. There's also a maths option in the skill drop-down menu, so you can search for questions that test those math skills, and you can select by topic, and it will then open up a menu that, like this one, that allows you to drill down into each topic and then choose specific subtopics to then search for past paper questions. You can then see the question, the mark scheme, the examiner report, and add those to a paper that you then construct, which you can export as a Word document or a PDF file. So extremely useful in terms of giving students plenty of practice questions to do in lessons, for homework activities, to get them familiar with the style of question, which, as I've already said, will be the same for linear, for modular as it is for linear. We also have a couple of topic supports for challenging topics. So one of these, energy stores and transfers, is a Unit 1 topic. That's on that same teaching and learning materials page. Past training content, I'll just quickly do this one as well. So there's a couple of zip files there in that same page for previous courses that have been delivered, which you might find useful. But for all of our past training that exists as a recording, we've now got a new YouTube channel. Public training videos means those that do not contain examples from the most recent exam papers, because the exam papers will be locked for teachers only to access. You will need an Edexcel online login, which you also need for Exam Wizard, which your exams officer at your school can set up for you if you don't have one. And those trainings won't be on this public YouTube channel until a year later, when we make those most recent exam papers public. But then you'll be able to access them here, and so will students. And so you might want to have a look at that YouTube channel. The link for that is also in your delegate booklet. Okay, I'll pause there and have a look at the chat. Okay, a couple of questions about Exam Wizard I'll take first. So the authentication code, you need to download the Pearson Authenticator app on a smartphone, and I'm afraid there's no way around this. The reason is that this account gives you access to student data for your centre, for example, through Results Plus, which we'll mention later. And so it's necessary to have this quite high level of data security that the Authenticator app gives you. Now, that can cause issues because if you, for example, get a new phone, then and you need to download the app again, and your account needs to be reset. But the solution is to get in touch with our customer service team. Let me just put a couple of links quickly into the chat. So our customer support portal for login help, I would recommend, because you don't need any subject specific help there. It's the same for all teachers. and one more link for those of you who've not yet managed to get that Edexcel online. Working. It is a little complicated, I'm afraid. There's an article there. Okay, other good questions in the chat about significant figures. So in general, we should follow the principle here of using the same number of significant figures that is given in the data that the calculations are based on. So the final answer should be given to the same number of significant figures as the lowest number of significant figures of the data that's given. So that principle applies. Question about IAL physics, where we have two papers, units 3 and unit 6 for the A-level course that some of you will know, which specifically assess practical techniques and skills, including things like data handling. There's nothing like that with the modular GCSE. Both units are the same in terms of really what they're assessing, and therefore students should be ready for questions that assess data handling, practical techniques in both units. Chimer asks, can we have better guidance on the expected number of questions for each unit, the ratio of each type, theoretical, practical, multiple choice, mathematical calculations, so we can generate mock exams for the students? Well, my answer to that is that there will be no difference from the linear course in terms of the style of question and the sort of total number of marks for each type. You've also got the sample assessment materials, the example papers, which are in your delegate pack. So I don't think we're going to be publishing anything else in terms of sort of breakdown of marks, but you can expect the pattern to be basically the same as those linear papers and the sample assessments, and use those as your guide when you're constructing your past papers. So yes, Heber, there is a recording for this meeting, and maybe Ellie can confirm this, but I think that you will be sent a link to the recording, so you'll be able to look back if you've missed any of it for any reason. Question about the formula sheet. So if you go back in the chat at 11:26, I posted a link to the linear formula sheet, and the modular one has not yet been published, but it will be very soon on the teaching and learning materials section of the qualification webpage, and it will be exactly the same as this year's and last year's linear equation sheet. So please use the linear one for any of your practice assessments. Make sure that students are aware of it and know what's on it. Suzanne, the exam for Unit 1 will be as the specimen paper in terms of timing, number of questions and length of the exam. Definitely yes, in terms of the total number of marks and the time. It will be 1 hour, 40 minutes and 90 marks. In terms of the number of questions, not guaranteed, because those 90 marks could be divided between slightly fewer or more total questions, like question 1, question 2, and so on. But yeah, in terms of the timing and the total number of marks, yes, that's in the specification. So the questions in the exam paper are uniformly divided. No specific topic has more marks than the other. Well, there's definitely 90 marks for Unit 1 and 90 marks for Unit 2. Within that, there's no guarantee that each subtopic will have exactly the same number of marks, but you can expect them all to be assessed. And that will be the same as for linear exams in the past. Okay, let's come back to the presentation. We don't have a huge amount more to cover in terms of slides, but I want to spend 10 minutes or so, excuse me, going through some lessons from past linear exam papers. Some of you will have seen some of this feedback before because you will have attended this training. There will be exam insights training for these first modular exams. Look out for those in late September or October, and we will advertise those to our subject update emails and in the news section of the website and the Pearson Development Academy. Let me just share that link with you in the chat while I mention it, in case you don't have this. This is where to look for training courses in the future. This is for International GCSE, this link, but you can change the level. If you change the level to key stage, so I think I might have shared key stage 5 with you there. Key stage 5 is A level, key stage 4 is GCSE. So the second link in the chat, I think, is the one that's filtered to the GCSE. So for future courses, that's where to look. Hassan asks, is the syllabus content different to the Cambridge syllabus? Yes, not hugely, I don't think. We do have a document on the website that allows you to compare this. I can just share that link for you. It's available as both an Excel spreadsheet and a PDF file. Bear with me a second. I was on the linear web page. Yeah, so for the modular one, we just have the Excel file at the moment. But if you are familiar with any international GCSE courses from other exam boards, then this document might be useful in your planning. Okay, a couple more good questions. I'll just answer these before we get into the exam insights. Expected grade boundaries for Unit 1 and Unit 2. We don't issue any predictions of that sort. There's no reason particularly to expect that they'd be very different from linear grade boundaries in terms of raw marks. But I'm afraid it is just a case of wait and see, because as always, the grade boundaries will be set once the papers have been marked and based on an analysis of the performance of the cohort. When searching for past papers, do we look for GCSE Physics? I get my past papers from my GCSE Physics. So yes, the linear past papers are very much useful. You might have missed me talking about Exam Wizard earlier. Exam Wizard lets you search for international GCSE linear physics exam questions, but that match the modular topics. So the differences to be aware of: if you're using linear papers as past papers, a linear paper 1 will assess quite a lot of content that's actually in the Unit 2 exam for modular, so that they don't need to cover, but it will also miss out some content. So if you're using a linear paper 1 as a practice exam, not only will it have some questions that they won't have been taught yet, probably because it's in Unit 2, but it will miss out the physics only content that they might actually need to know. So for that reason, they can be useful, but you'd probably want to strip out questions that they don't need to cover. And it's probably simplest to do that using a linear paper 2, because the paper 2 assesses the whole course for linear, including the physics only content. And you need to make sure, if your students are doing the physics modular exam, that they're familiar with all the physics only content in there. So let me just find a linear paper for you. I tell you what, I will answer that question, but I'm just conscious that other people might be itching to hear some exam insights. So Dahlia, I will put that in the chat when I next pause. But let me just give you some feedback here from the senior examiners who write these examiner reports, very useful documents. These bits of feedback are sort of gleaned from the last few years of linear exams. So we mentioned it near the start of today's session, but the application skill, which is AO2, Assessment Objective 2, is a key one, and being able to think on their feet, as it were, and to apply their knowledge to new contexts is something it's worth practicing with them. Evaluation is challenging and also worth practicing. Students might benefit from some modeling of how to answer those exam questions, using examples in past examiner reports for modular papers, or linear papers, sorry. Describe and explain can be confused, and it's important that they understand that when they're asked to explain something, they need to give reasons, whereas description is a bit of a simpler skill. Core practicals, they're listed in the specification. It's expected that they have done them and they understand those techniques. So just as for the linear papers, they need to know all of those for the correct unit for modular. Mathematical skills, which we've already talked about, are key, and strong advice to show all their working, because if they make a mistake, they can then still gain credit for steps in the working that are correct. Correct use of scientific terminology, very important, and a key focus for revision. Further advice from examiners to the candidates: read the question carefully. Including sufficient points is a very useful piece of advice. Look at the number of marks available and try to include a point for every mark. Practicing calculations, and the appendix on this in the specification is worth looking at and with students, I think. Diagrams, often students lose marks because they're rushing and their diagrams are not accurate and not carefully drawn, so that's worth talking to them about. Using precise terminology again, revising the practicals, bit of repetition here. Make sure you know and understand all of those key terms, using that vocabulary accurately. Identifying variables. So the experiment design question, if you're used to the linear exams, then you'll know that this always appears in the linear paper 1, and the linear paper 2 always starts with a scientific article. There's no guarantee, even though that is the pattern in the sample assessment materials, there's no guarantee that that will be the case with Unit 1 and Unit 2. So it's worth looking at those other styles of question. They could have an article response question in Unit 1. So the 6-mark design a study might not come in Unit 1, but they should expect it to come in one unit or the other. Ensure that they give the independent variable, the range they're going to use, the dependent variable, how they're going to measure it, control variables, how they will be controlled. Learning units, using them accurately. So in a past exam series, the unit for resistance was one that students struggled with. Okay, so we have a few questions to look at here. Would these answers gain the mark? What do you think? Well, this was a question that students struggled with, and I think it's a good example of where simple questions, which can be addressed by good revision of key terms, actually often students are not well prepared for. So NG per unit charge was all they needed here. So the second answer does get this mark, but the first one is not precise enough and would not gain credit for that. So preparing students for simple questions that just require a few words of definition is a good focus for your revision. Here's an interesting one, and these responses are in your delegate booklet if it's a bit easier to look at them all together there. Explain how the magnitude of the acceleration of the object changes from the instant the object is released until the first time it returns to its initial resting position. Now, that won't make a huge amount of sense until you see the rest of the question, which is in the booklet. Don't worry if you've not managed to download it, but it should be there in the resources section of this Zoom meeting. I'll give you 2 or 3 minutes just to have a look at those and think about them. I'm not sharing the mark scheme with you because that would actually make it a bit too easy a task for you, but see if you can work out what you would give them, and I'll show you the mark scheme in a second. Okay, I've just put a, oh, I've just sent it to one person, not all of you. I'll try that again. Yes, so an answer in the chat about confirming which paper, if you want to just find a whole paper from the linear course and then remove the questions which are testing Unit 2 modular content. I've sent a suggested link and the page where you can download all of those. And my suggestion is use paper 2, because if you use paper 1, then you won't have any questions on the physics only content, because paper 1 for linear is also the paper that the double award students sit who haven't studied the additional physics only content. Okay. I'll just give you another 30 seconds or so, and then we'll look at those responses to the spring question. Okay, so this is a difficult question, and it's a good example of one where it's challenging because of the word explain. It's a kind of unfamiliar situation where students really have to think through the physics. Really, they need to pay close attention to what the question is actually asking them. So it's asking them about the magnitude of the acceleration. So they need to focus on that. And there's this instruction to refer to the forces acting on the object in their answer. Here's the mark scheme. So the acceleration will decrease is the key point. That's what will happen as it moves towards its initial resting position. And then any two of these are sufficient explanation. So the extension decreases, therefore the force, the upwards force, the force from the spring decreases, the weight of the object stays the same, therefore the resultant force decreases. And they could say it decreases to 0, but that's in brackets because it's not actually necessary for the mark. But once it's in its initial resting position, there'll be a resultant force of 0 because the force in the spring will equal the weight. So this answer, the magnitude will change as from the instant the object is released, it has kinetic energy being transferred elastically. Then once it returns to its resting point, it loses some kinetic energy and gains gravitational potential through an elastic store. Now there's some correct physics here, but it's quite confused. the focus on energy stores is not helpful, doesn't match up with the mark scheme, as you've seen. And although it says the magnitude will change, it doesn't say that the magnitude of the acceleration will decrease. So 0 marks for this first one. Magnitude decreases as energy decreases due to air resistance. So the spring has less elastic potential energy and the weight stays the same. So the upward resultant force of magnitude decreases. Now, they haven't said the magnitude of the acceleration decreases, but this would be clear enough to get that first mark. The point about air resistance is it's not wrong, but it doesn't actually help to answer this question. It's not part of the explanation. So they wouldn't be penalized for writing that, but they wouldn't gain any credit for it. Likewise, the fact it's got less elastic potential energy, it's not wrong, but it's not part of the explanation. However, they have said that the weight stays the same, and they have said that the upward resultant force decreases. So they've actually hit those last 2 bullet points there. So that would gain all 3 marks, despite the fact that they've not focused very tightly on what the question was asking them. And the final version here, when the object returns to its initial resting position, the acceleration will decrease until the forces acting on it balance out. Well, they've got the idea of acceleration decreasing, so they've got the first mark. Until the forces acting on it balance out, the question is, would they pick up this mark, the resultant force decreasing to 0? Allow forces are balanced if clear that this only applies when the mass is at its initial resting position. So that would just do that. They've got the fact it's back at its initial resting position, and then the forces are balanced. It's not expressed as technically as it might be, but it's sufficient for 2 marks out of 3. So quite useful illustrative examples there of how to approach that question, hopefully. So I'm just going to finish off with a very quick reminder of some of the resources and sources of support available to you. And then we'll have 15 minutes left where you're free to go. And thank you for staying this long. But you can also stay to ask questions and see what the answers are. So Results Plus will become very useful to you when the results are released in August. If you've not used it before, it's another free online service you can access with your Edexcel Online login, and it allows you to see how your students have performed and compare their performance question by question to the Edexcel averages. It's worth pointing out to them while we're on this slide that their exam papers will be scanned and examiners will be marking individual questions on screen. Therefore, it's really important that they write their answers in the correct spaces on the exam paper. There's also a point I've just remembered I included in my last subject update about multiple choice questions. It's very important that they answer these as the exam instructs them to, by putting a cross through the correct answer. Sometimes students write the correct letter, like an A or B, just next to the multiple choice question. Those are marked by computer. No humans look at those. And so if they don't put a cross where they're supposed to, then they won't get the mark, most likely. So that's also worth talking to them about. Exam Wizard, we've talked about at some length. Highly recommended to get the login for that sorted and use it to filter questions to the relevant topic. Access to scripts, with students' permission, you'll be able to actually see their marked responses to their exams with this service, which opens on results day, and there's a window of a couple of months when you can get access to those. We have teaching hubs resources available along with the textbook. Not essential to use. It's the same textbook as for the linear course, but available to you along with those additional online resources. If you don't already have it, then do have a look. And yes, as I said, teaching hubs is the accompanying resources, including practice assessments, very useful at exam time. We have a new Facebook group just launched today, so you could be one of the very first people to join it. We've created these for a number of other subjects already, and they've been very successful. The idea is that you can ask questions, other teachers can answer, but in a way that I have some oversight of, so I can correct any advice that I disagree with. But it's also another channel to stay in touch with me and get updates and so on. So I just put the link in the chat now to that. If you use Facebook, please do join. You have to answer all the questions and agree to the group rules to be added to that as a private group, and we want to make sure that it doesn't fill up with spam and things like that. So there's that. My contact details, do email me. You can also use the link on the website for booking a Teams meeting with me if that would be helpful, and phone to go through to our customer services team. So there we go. Any other questions you have, please do put them in the chat now. Thank you very much for all your excellent questions. And if you are leaving now, then best of luck to your students. And yeah, do stay in touch. Yes, Heather, a recording has been recorded, and I believe you will receive an email with a link to download that recording. It will also make its way onto YouTube in due course, and you'll be able to find it there as well. If a student writes a wrong point, then a correct point, how is it marked? Is a great question. Generally, our examiners apply the principle of positive marking, which means that they would gain the mark in that case. However, there are exceptions. So sometimes a mark scheme will have the instruction to reject a particular idea. In other mark schemes, it will say ignore. If it says ignore, then it's irrelevant that they've written it. You do as the mark scheme instructs and just ignore that point. If it says reject, then they would effectively lose that mark point, even if they'd already also written something valid for it. There's another type of question where something called the list rule applies, which means that if it's a question where a student could give sort of almost every possible answer. So let's say it's asking for the dependent variable in an investigation, and they name all the variables that are given in the scenario, so confident that one of them must be dependent, they would not get credit for that. So generally, ignore wrong answers and credit right ones, but there are types of question where that doesn't apply. So the June 2024 exam papers for linear, yes, you have access to those as long as you have your Edexcel online login. But because we want you to be able to use the last year's papers for unseen mock exams for students, they have that padlock. So only teachers with a Edexcel login can download the 2024 exam papers at the moment. They'll become public once this exam series is underway. I'll put my email in the chat now. teachingscience@pearson.com. Interesting example. If an answer included a decrease and an increase of a value written by mistake, I think in that case, they would not get credit. They might do, depending on exactly what they'd written, if the examiner was confident that one of them was written in error. But because they could otherwise write both increase and decrease and definitely get the mark, they would not be credited for writing both in that case, I think. the word condone in a mark scheme. So condone basically means accept it. It's sufficient for the mark. How many marks can be lost and still get a grade 9 is a good question. So the grade 9 grade boundary, as a rough guide, I would look at the grade boundaries that are published for the linear exams, and I doubt it would be very different to that. So a question about the new paper format. I can just send you a link now to the sample materials in case you've not got them in your delegate pack. Grade boundaries, let me send you a link to where you can find those. So sorry, my answer about the grade boundaries was to have a look at the grade 9 grade boundary for the last linear papers and to expect them to be quite similar for this first modular exam. Yeah, the conversion from raw mark to UMS is a complex thing, but I think look at those again. Look at those raw mark grade boundaries, and if you're making predictions for students and parents and for your schools, then I would be guided by those raw mark linear grade boundaries as a guide. So a question about the policy of counting only the last 2 attempts at modular exams. Well, I think that the logic behind it is that it's really not in students' interests to encourage them to take exams again and again and again, because they're unlikely keep getting better. So the logic of the best of their last 2 attempts is if they've taken it and got worse and taken it and got worse again, then it suggests that maybe the first one wasn't a true reflection of where they really were. As long as they keep getting better, then it makes sense for them to keep repeating it. But if they're not getting better, then it means that they shouldn't keep trying. And I think that's probably in everyone's best interests. Do you recommend students entering November exam for Unit 1? Really, I think it all comes down to what makes most sense for your students in your setting. So I'm not sure whether you mean as a second attempt or as a first attempt, that question, but it could be that you decide that, particularly if English isn't their main language or their first language, that your students might be more ready for Unit 1 in November as a first sitting, or it might be that you always intend to enter them in June and in November this year to give them 2 attempts. So I think it all comes down to the context of your learners, what time is right for them to enter. And that's the bonus of the modular system, is you have a lot of different options. For this first series, obviously you don't have much to inform those, but you can reflect on what's gone well and build on that, hopefully. Do you recommend a certain order in teaching Unit 1? I mean, personally, I think the order in the specification is a sensible one, but there could well be other ways of doing it that work even better. But I think working through the specification makes a great deal of sense. I'm just going to move all the way back to this page. So for Unit 1 exam, you need to have covered all of these topics on the left here. So if you've just done electricity and forces, then you probably have to pick up the pace a bit. But these aren't necessarily all equal sized, and that solids, liquids and gases part 1, I think, is probably a little bit of a shorter unit. But I think it's definitely a good time to look carefully at how many lessons you have remaining and to work out the best use of that remaining time. Yeah, first attempt in November. I think you have the advantage that you have longer to prepare them, so it's a perfectly sensible option. But then you have relatively short time to the end of the course, assuming you're splitting it over 2 years, to complete Unit 2. So you'd also be needing to teach Unit 2 before they sat the Unit 1, if that makes sense. I think questions from past papers only is the best option. There's lots of linear past papers because the course has been running for many years. And so there's plenty there, and that ensures that you're using the correct style of questions and you've got proper mark schemes to use. Great. Well, we've pretty much reached the end of our session. I hope that I've answered all of the questions in the chat. Thank you for asking so many good ones. Please do email me on that address that I've put in the chat, which yeah, will come through to me. And thanks again for being here.